Theodore Roosevelt once said, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best, if he wins, knows the thrills of high achievement, and if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat."
Here we go. All right, welcome back. Day Before Rehab podcast. I got my buddy Bret here. The reason why I really wanted you on, so when I was in rehab, there was this guy I became friends with. I call him Big Chris. Very similar to you. Super successful, worked in the banking industry, had like 300 employees working under him, but he couldn't stop drinking. But he was the most well-spoken, most articulate guy in the treatment center. He had so much more better advice than the counselors. And he would tell you, but I can't take my own advice. I'll give you advice. And I'm not saying that you're him, but the connection I had with him, I saw it in you the first time you read How It Works. Like, man, this guy really speaks well, is very articulate. And then you shared. And I'm like, man, this guy's awesome. This guy's awesome. So that was my first introduction to you. You reading How It Works and me thinking of Big Chris from Caron Treatment Center.
Well, first of all, I appreciate it. And by the way, my story starts, and not to jump right into it, my story starts at a Caron Treatment Center, which was called Chit Chat Farms.
Yeah.
I want to say Walmelsdorf down near Reading.
It's in Reading, yep.
Yeah, and I was there in 1985 when I was 22 years of age.
Wow, I didn't know that. How crazy is that?
Was sober for about a year and a half after that, and then was out using again, drinking, and drug of choice back in the day was cocaine. And,
great drug.
And then in 1990, met the woman who was going to be my wife, and had what I had the first of what I call my moment of clarity, where a coworker of hers came up to me and said, "Hey, she's interested in going out with you," and I was like, "Yeah, cool." And the coworker went away, and I was like, "She's not going to want to go out with me. I'm a drunk." And just moment of clarity of, maybe if I weren't a drunk, she'd be interested.
Right.
And so we went on 2 dates. I fell for her. She was absolutely great. We're divorced now, but oh my God, she changed my life for the better in so many different ways. And so that then led to 34 years of sobriety, where I wasn't necessarily active in AA through all of that, but the 12 steps of AA and sobriety were very much part of my daily life.
Right.
But I have to laugh because, as you know, and the listeners will know, and by the way, your podcast is always designed to be real, and I feel the need, my friends in my professional networks haven't heard from me since June of 2024, and we're recording this in early February. Mm-hmm. And partly with a little bit of a trigger warning, we are going to talk just a little bit about suicide, and which is true to my story, and stuff related to recovery. But I tried it in my life, and I haven't re-engaged with social media since then. There have been a couple of people that have been very helpful with specific closing down my townhouse and sending a little bit of support. But most people haven't heard from me. I've been silent on Facebook, silent on LinkedIn, silent on Twitter. So the professional people don't know where I've been, et cetera, et cetera. So this for me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here. This for me is the opportunity to say, hey, this is where I've been, how I'm doing, which I'm doing much better than I was. But I had to laugh because met a dear friend in the treatment center in the summer of 2024 named Peyton, 21-year-old woman who's we just collect. She's an old soul and whatnot. And she got there the first day, and second day she sat next to me at the table, and she and I, with 4 or 5 others, shared every meal for the next 30 days.
Yeah, it's a bond.
And as I was released, they have this beautiful exit ceremony if you're getting discharged. And basically everybody stands up and says a few nice words about you to send you off on your way.
Yep.
And Peyton and I were close enough, she actually wrote me a letter that she proceeded to read. But it started with, and this is a very long-winded way, Anthony, of getting back to the nice things you said about me. It started with, first editing comment, language.
Yeah, we curse all the time.
Okay. So her letter, and forgive me, but I'm quoting her. Her letter was, Dear Bret, when I first got to treatment, I could not figure out why you were here. By day 3, I realized you're just as fucked up as the rest of us. Yeah. So there's a little bit of how you present, and how you come across. You know, we all know that there are people that seem off in some way or another. I, however, have come across as, you know, people who know me professionally, and you're aware that I've hosted my own podcast for 7 years until the suicide attempt. People would look at me through a certain lens without any clue that every day I was riddled with depression, anxiety,
right.
You know, and all that sort of thing.
So this experience was back in the 90s, 1990s? Is this experience you're talking about?
No, this was actually the summer of 2024.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
And forgive me if the timeline is a little bit askew. Let me clean it up a little bit. So in 1990, I met the woman that I was going to marry, and we were together, I think 23, 24 years, and she decided that she didn't want to be married, at least to me. So the marriage came to an end, and not long after the marriage, I became what's called a trustee for employee-owned companies, and you coincidentally in your day life work for an employee-owned company.
Yes.
So a lot of times I'll say, I'm a trustee for employee-owned companies. People are like,
what does that mean?
And you're like, when you and I first met, it was actually at a breakfast with mutual friends, and you're like, oh, I know exactly what that is. And I was like, yay. So I hosted, apologize for my cold. I hosted for 7 years the ESOP Podcast, and ESOPs are employee stock ownership plans, and it's a very small field, very small niche. There are 6,500 employee-owned companies in the United States, but most people don't know what it is. And for example, it's enough of a secret that Wawa, which is huge in Philadelphia and up and down the East Coast, is 49% employee-owned, and most people don't realize that.
Yeah, I didn't know that till just now.
See that? So, and suddenly it became my podcast where Anthony's on to talk about. No, but so I hosted the podcast. Was really successful as a trustee. Sold the business in 2019 to my former partner. He bought me out, and I kept the podcast, which I had started in 2017, and the social media properties, and I continued to work on that presence. So, you know, I'm very proud of the fact in a niche that nobody's heard of, everybody, you know, if you're anybody in that field, chances are you've been on my podcast, and I consider them friends and whatnot, and absolutely loved it. But at some point, I was just living the life of a guy who had sold a successful business, and I realized, and dealing with, I had mentioned the depression, the anxiety. In 2019, I had 3 really serious week-long PTSD attacks, et cetera, et cetera. And it was really weird. There's one that I very clearly remember, and I remember my guest, where I had to drive to Philadelphia from Harrisburg. I spent most of my life about an hour and a half from Philly, and I was in full PTSD mode on the drive down and on the drive home, and you can't hear it on the podcast. Like even I know that I was in a horrible place.
Really?
But for some reason, turn on the microphone and it wasn't there. So December of 2023, I realized I was going to run out of money sometime in the coming year, and just decided that I had had a good run. I was 60 years old. That's enough, you know. And so when I ran out of money, I was going to end my life. And there was no struggle about it. There was no depression about it. It simply was, I have a business plan. And the plan is when I am broke, I'll run out of money. Once or twice during the lead up to it, I did a little bit of a gut check of, hey, maybe I should reach out. You know, there's helplines available. And I do just want to share really quick for those who are listening. SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration for the United States, has a phone lifeline, text lifeline, where if you just dial 988, you can get help. And I thought about reaching out for help with the suicide ideations, but the it always came back to, but I'm going to be broke. I'm okay dying.
Because you were broke.
Because I was broke. Yeah, I was out of money and couldn't quite figure out, knew that I could get hired and do stuff, but I had done my own thing for so long, had been self-employed for so long. And by the way, I am now calmly trying to explain to you what was going on while my mind was filled with depression and anxiety. So the reality is I was wrong, that I certainly regret it. But as the time approached, I went through all kinds of, how am I going to do this? And to be honest with you, with everything you read about overdosing and whatnot, I wanted to just track down some fentanyl, which I've never had in my life, or
Right.
track down some heroin, which I've never had in my life, and buy enough to OD and not wake up.
So this was your business plan?
This was my business plan.
Right.
This is my personal plan. But, and it's going to sound perhaps really stupid, I was trying to end my life. I wasn't trying to jam anyone else up. And I know that the way law enforcement works now, in the past it just would have been, oh, he OD'd. Now it's, we're going to find where he bought it. We're going to find. So I'm like, somebody would have the misfortune of knowing me well enough that I could ask them for drugs. And, in Philadelphia, and I'm not going to mention the area, but there's an area that everybody knows geographically.
Sure.
You can go to and you can find drugs and that sort of thing. And Harrisburg doesn't. Central Pennsylvania doesn't have that, et cetera, et cetera. So that was out. But I really was just like, I will go to sleep. I will not wake up. It'll be cool. And then thought of other things that people talk about, which is, driving my car at a high rate of speed into something. But I didn't want to cause an accident where I want to die, so I'm going to inflict trauma on another driver that they're going to have to deal with for the rest of their life.
Right.
So to be honest with you, and I am going to talk just for a minute, and the story gets so much better. But as this is here, I decided that I would end it with cutting myself, and I'll leave it at that. And about a week before, this is now June of 2024, late May. And by the way, Memorial Day, I celebrated 34 years of sobriety.
So you haven't relapsed at
No, I
this
hadn't
point?
relapsed.
Wow.
No, and just had gone through and was very active. I served for 10 years on the board of directors of an organization devoted to helping lawyers who were in crises and whatnot. So if somebody was a lawyer and wondered if they had an addiction issue, I might be one of, a dozen people that were referred to them. So I'd take them to meetings and all that kind of thing. And although I wasn't working the steps as we talk about it now in terms of working the steps, I was pretty much living the steps as best I could. But it was very informal, and again, not with the effect that it has now. So Memorial Day, I celebrate 34 years of sobriety, and about June 1st, about a week before, like now it's like, I'm running out of money. The bank account's not lying, not going to be able to make rent for June. Was down to about $200 in my bank account. Didn't feel, and I want to give a sincere apology to a number of people who love me, who it turns out after the fact would have helped me if I had asked. But it's also with mental health and addictions, I'm not the only one who's like, dude, I give help. I don't ask for help.
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. So there are people that probably would have helped me or would have sent my butt to treatment or whatnot, couldn't ask for help. So beginning of June, I got a couple $100 left in my account, and I went out and I bought the largest bag of dog food. I had a dog, Milo, at the time, who has since been rehomed, and bought a largest bag of food for Milo that I could find. And I went to the liquor store because I wanted to end my life, but I didn't want it to be painful. And I knew that I was going to cut myself, so I decided that I would be drunk when I did it. And it's funny because you walk in, besides being in recovery and being sober a long time, I also have ADHD. I don't know the last time you went into a liquor store, but like when I drank, you had Jim Beam, you had Jack Daniels, and you maybe had 2 or 3 other, kinds of whiskeys or whatever. And I go, and now there's a wall of like 100 different
all
whiskeys.
these beautiful colors.
And bottles and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, duh. So I actually honed in on the Jack Daniels and the Jim Beam because it's like, I'm going to relapse on something I know. And what it really came down to is Jim Beam, 5th Jim Beam was 29 and the 5th Jack Daniels was 19. And I'm like, do this because I'm broke. I'll take the Jack Daniels and save $10, et cetera, et cetera. The Jack Daniels sat on my counter for 7 days. Never thought about it, didn't drink it. This wasn't, and by the way, there are people in the program who give me grief about this. This was a relapse. And I'm like, no, it was a suicide attempt. Like, I know that the whiskey was sitting in my kitchen for 7 days. I never gave it any thought.
So you bought the whiskey knowing that in 7 days you were going to take the, okay.
Oh, I'm
So you were just like, you were just preparing at this point.
I'm going to end my life when I'm broke. I'm down to $200.
Right.
At this point, you know, to be honest with you, I ate out every meal from 2020 till 2024, but I ate out well, and I ate out really nice restaurants. Well, for the last month or so, almost every dinner was a $10 pizza from Domino's, which was better than the $40 dinner and $20 tip, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I knew that it was going to end, and I knew that it was approaching, so I buy the whiskey, and sure enough, June 7th, it's a Friday, my utilities are off. My rent is overdue, and I don't have any opportunity. And by the way, you know, when I say I sold the company or sold the business and did well and lived off of it, I was living by myself in a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom deluxe townhouse. You know, my cigar people are like, how'd you run out of money? Well, I spent $12,000 a year on cigars.
I remember you saying that.
You know, et cetera, et cetera. Like,
that made sense to me, actually.
Yeah, okay. Well, we all have our addictions and all that kind of stuff. Although, a good friend of mine, who's the manager of the cigar shop, and his wife, coincidentally, was a social media person and the mastermind behind my podcast with all the technical stuff. When I first started smoking cigars, he said, it's not a habit, it's a hobby. It's 6 cigars a day.
Wow, that's a lot. That's like my old boss.
And nice cigars.
Yeah.
So the time came, and it was 1 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and this is it, dude. And by the way, here's what's weird. Not weird, but here's my reality. For about a month ahead of time, I treated myself so kindly. We talk a lot about higher power in recovery. And I am okay that there is a God. And for those who aren't necessarily versed in recovery, you accept a higher power, whatever it is, just so that it's a higher power than yourself.
Yep.
I've referred for many years, I use God interchangeably with the universe. And I don't completely know what's out there, but I don't think there's an old white dude with a beard who kind of superficially looks at me, who's in his chair staring down at all of us. And that's not knocking anybody whose view of that, but I kind of think
your view.
It's my view, and I kind of think the universe is made up of energy, and there's good energy and bad energy. I didn't want to die with bad energy. I didn't want to die with not being in a state of grace with myself. So for about a month, and again, this wasn't like I wasn't tortured. I was like, I've had a good run. It is
so
time to go.
you're walking around through life during this time, and you're totally okay with everything other than being broke.
Yeah.
Like, are you depressed? Are you feeling anxious during this time?
And I'd mentioned the cigar shop, which has been an important part of my life. My friends were there. That was my circle. In 2008, they gave me a key to the cigar shop. I happen to be Jewish, so for 15, 16 years, Easter and Christmas Day, I would actually keep the cigar shop open so that people with nowhere else to go could at least go to the cigar shop and have a cigar and that sort of thing. So I'd be talking to you, and this is like 2 weeks out, and I'm like, wow, this might be the last conversation I ever have with Anthony. But you didn't know that.
Right.
And there was no depression. There was like, I was being a little nostalgic. I was being a little bit of positivity and whatnot. But I wanted you, when I left, to be like, wow, I had such a good conversation with him, because that's where I wanted my head to be.
Right. You wanted to leave people with these good memories of you, knowing it might be the last time you ever speak with them.
And by the way, dude, I wasn't doing this for a cry for help. You know, this was... people didn't know because I didn't want them to know,
right.
You know, et cetera, et cetera. So I ended up, and I feel a little bit guilty because, you know, maybe it's a technology secret or that kind of thing, but I was worried about my dog, Milo, who I'd mentioned, and I got a big bag of food for him so that he would have it, but I was afraid that I would pass away and Milo would spend a week, and I used to travel significantly for business. So not showing up at the cigar shop for 4 or 5 days would not necessarily have alerted anybody.
Right.
At some point, the woman who managed my podcasts, if I didn't drop an episode, maybe like, hey, we need to check anything. But I was worried that Milo would be alone with my body for a period of time, and I didn't want that to happen. So there were 8 people that I was close to in life, either friends or business colleagues. Another guy who's a great guy who hosted a podcast that I produced, another employee ownership podcast. The woman who ran the podcast, a guy who's been a friend since I was a kid, who was also my lawyer, and when I practiced law, he was my boss for a while. And then just 5 people that I felt the need to say I love you and goodbye to. And the funny thing is that each of these ended with a paragraph. This is just covering into the recovery thing. Hey, I just want you to know that it's important for me that you understand that it will show that there was alcohol in my system at the end, but that was because I didn't want to feel the physical pain.
Right.
That this was not Bret got drunk and lost control, et cetera, et cetera. So Google lets you write emails, and I do not recommend it, and I don't recommend it for suicide. This is not what I'm saying. But you can schedule emails to be sent out later. So you're going to be on vacation Tuesday. You need to respond to a customer Tuesday, write the email Friday, schedule it.
Right.
I wrote these emails, included, and this is the extent that I'll say with it, a very lengthy letter to my children that I had attached to the email to my friend, the lawyer. The last 2 days, I was writing friends, and I was saying goodbye. And even Friday afternoon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm like, this is going down this afternoon, and I was comfortable with it. But I had a couple of emails to set up. So I wrote these emails, and they were scheduled to go out Saturday, 11 a.m. And I knew any one of these 8, this was not what do I do? Any one of these 8 were going to arrange welfare checks, like in a heartbeat.
Yeah, instantly.
Et cetera, et cetera. So start drinking the Jack Daniels about 1 o'clock. About 4 o'clock, it's time. And I go into the bathroom, and I still remember this dude. Certainly I am now under the influence of a 5th of Jack Daniels. And getting back to the recovery thing, oh my God, it went down so smooth. Oh my God. And I'm like, wow, I am drunk.
First time in 34 years.
First time in 34 years. And oh my God, but for the fact that, like, if I had a couple of grand, maybe it just would have been the start of a relapse. But, I was like, okay. But I'm tasting it. I acknowledge that it was great. But I remember sitting, it's time to go. It's time to go. And I'm just singing to myself, it's time to go. It's time to go. And I begin to end my life. And it's working. A lot of blood.
Yeah.
And I am so okay with it. I'm just calm. I'm peaceful. This is it. And I clotted. And it stopped. And about 6:30 p.m., I'm like, this isn't going to work. So I tried a couple of different ways with depleting myself of oxygen. And by the way, if people look on the video, and I'm not recommending, I'm a big guy. Now, I've put on some weight since last summer. I didn't want to use anything with ropes because I was afraid the ceiling would collapse. And now I'm just a fat, depressed guy with a broken leg, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll never forget that sing-song, it's time to go, it's time to go. Tried 3 more times to asphyxiate. And about 2 a.m, I was like, this isn't going to work. And there's going to be a welfare check at 11.
Yeah.
And I sat in a reclining chair with Milo, waited for the police, and decided...
When you say waited for the police, like, the emails are going to go out, someone's going to come to you soon,
Yeah.
and you're just waiting.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm calm. And I'm a mess because of what I tried to do.
I mean, there's evidence of what you try to do everywhere, right? I mean, I'm guessing everything's bloody, a
essentially,
mess, just kind of fucked up a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't want to... Yeah, it was a crime scene.
Yeah. Wow, Jesus Christ.
So I'm just sitting there. It was like 11:10. Emails go at 11. Mm-hmm. And I see the landlord outside the one window, and I see a police officer approach. And by the way, here's the coincidental thing. When I had begun to cut myself, the landlord came. The rent was overdue. I had put Milo out on my deck because I didn't really want him to be around me as I'm trying to do this. And I had unlocked the front door because I knew the next morning they were coming for me. I didn't think I was going to be there, but they were coming for me. I didn't want them to break the door down.
You're like the most considerate person ever trying to commit suicide.
It was, oh my God. I didn't want to be a mess. I didn't want to get somebody in jail. I didn't want to cause a car accident.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking in my head, all these different things.
Really was as ethical, except for the fact that, oh my God, the number I did on my friends, and I'll get to that in a moment. Landlord's banging on the front door. He didn't realize the front door was unlocked. He's just there to collect his rent.
So he doesn't know at this point.
He doesn't know at this point. He sent a text that, "Are you okay? Your dog's on the back porch, but you're not home. Are you okay?" And let's just say being behind in the rent was not characteristic of me, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. He's a good guy, and I apologize. I do feel badly because, as the person who owned the property, he went through some stuff. So 11:10. I see landlord out one window, and I see the police car comes to another, and I just go to the front door and open the door, and I'm holding my hands up because I want the police to see it. I tried to kill myself. Now I'm going to get shot by the cops, which is not what I wanted. So I'm holding my hands up, and you can see a lot of blood coming from the wound because I didn't, try and fix anything. I just sat there, et cetera, et cetera. And the cop said, "There's people worried about you."
Yeah.
And I had also decided at that point that during the night waiting for the police that I was going to take advantage of any treatment that was offered. That this wasn't I had done my best to end my life, and the universe said, not yet.
So you actually thought that in this moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you seem to me like the type of guy that finishes what he starts. And I say it like, I know, and I don't want to jump around.
Did I let you down?
No, but you came to a point in your life where you were so okay with the decision you were making. You're talking about 2 weeks out, 7 days out, having these conversations, nostalgia. I want this person to leave better than he came after you talk to them, knowing that it might be the last time you saw him. And then it doesn't work out, and you instantly shift to, okay, the universe is telling me something.
Well, I'm not sure what would have happened if I had had another bottle of Jack.
Right, so you finished that.
I'm not sure. Yeah, and at this point, when I was trying to asphyxiate myself, and there was, I was close, and at the last minute, plastic bag over my head, and I apologize. I'm not trying, but I'd rip it off. I couldn't, and I mean, body is shaking, sweat coming out of every single pore, me not being able to breathe, but at the last moment, just by reflex, I'm pulling it out.
That's like this human nature, right? You want to save yourself, I guess, in that moment.
Yeah. And by the way, some stupid idiots have said to me in the 7 months since or 8 months since,
I remember
well,
this.
you weren't really trying.
Yeah.
Kiss my ass in more ways than you will ever know. you know, and what a stupid thing. And I got to tell you, there have been conversations where people have said, well, this is what you did wrong in the attempt. And first of all, I'm like, how incredibly stupid. And what ended up, I settled on, and I've done this 3 or 4 times, let me make some notes for the next time.
I remember saying
and they're like,
that.
oh my God,
Well, that's a weird conversation to have anyway, but then for someone to tell you what you did wrong in the attempt, I don't even know how that would even be a conscious thought to share with the individual.
A lot of unthinking people. So a couple of shout outs that I got to do. I have a dear friend, Mandy. She was a hostess and a server and management at one of the restaurants that I went to for breakfast a lot. And she was one of the ones who got the email and was the first one to call the police. I'm now, they offer you transportation to the psych ward. Mm-hmm. And
now you're in Harrisburg at this time?
I'm in Harrisburg.
Okay.
Yeah, so Holy Spirit Hospital is, at least for many years, was the go-to for the psych ward. And I voluntarily committed myself. But that's like saying, Your Honor, I volunteer to go to jail before you send me there. Like, I was on my way to the psych ward, and it really is just I'm either going to be involuntarily committed or I can volunteer. And the distinction, as the cops, who, by the way, were wonderful, but the cops explained to me is if you voluntarily commit yourself, there's no court record that will be public. So if you're involuntarily committed, anybody can get a hold of your records and, et cetera, et cetera. So I was like, I'll volunteer. And by the way, at this point, I'm ready for treatment. Like I have said, my way did not work. I was sincere about it, but it didn't work. A couple of days into the psych ward, I was talking to the nurse, and she said something. I don't remember what it was. And I said, well, I'm here voluntarily. And she said, do you really think that matters? And I said, what do you mean? She said, try leaving. Because the moment you try walking out the door, the police will be here to involve,
there goes your voluntary status.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, well, that's very
It's
good.
amazing you have all these coherent thoughts during this whole process. Like you're still dialed into everything that's going on, but you just tried to commit the worst act ever that you could to yourself. And but
it's again for where my place was, and I've been so fortunate in my life, and a lot of what we do in AA is perspective.
Yeah.
But I traveled through most of the country by car. I was so lucky after my divorce that I had a BMW hardtop convertible. If I had a meeting in Boston, my partner, and this happened all the time, so we had clients all over the country. My partner would do what many people would say was the rational thing. He would drive down to BWI in Baltimore, hop on a plane, fly to Boston for a 1-hour meeting, and he'd fly home, and he's home by dinner. I, however, if we had a 1-hour meeting on a Tuesday afternoon, I would leave Monday morning, I would drive there, and I'd spend 3 days driving back and forth because the work was such, and our clients were national, that I discovered my clients didn't care where I was. They just wanted me on the phone.
Right.
So I traveled, ate in great restaurants, and I apologize for the cough. I'm coming off with bad cold. Dated some wonderful women, post-divorce and all that kind of. So it was like, oh my God, 60. I'm so frickin' old. I had mentioned Mandy. I'm in the psych ward, my friend Mandy, and I'm in the emergency room waiting to be taken up to the psych ward, and I see Mandy walk in. I'm going to get emotional now. She and I both start crying. We talk, and Mandy, oh my God, above and beyond, and I'm embarrassed at what I must have put her through among my other friends. But she comes to visit me, or to see me at the emergency room, just walks in, and it's like, oh my God, this is real. Like I assume restrained, I don't really remember. Like I wasn't handcuffed at any point, but they actually had someone watching me, so maybe I wasn't restrained. But she comes in, and then we chat for a little bit, and then she gets a FaceTime. She gets me to FaceTime with a woman, and I'll use her name, Lori Besden. Lori is legendary in the recovery circles. Lori is executive director of Lawyers Concern for Lawyers. Lori, just last week I saw on Facebook, had celebrated 21 years of sobriety herself. And now I've got these people who mean so much to me. And the magnitude of what I've done to those who care about me begins to sink in. And Mandy, first of all, Lori was great. Lori's, you want to talk about being humbled? Lori sent underwear to me at the treatment facility because I'm like, I don't have enough underwear, et cetera, et cetera. God, I was so stupid. I bring a bag to the psych ward. It's like this Jimmy Buffett shirt. Like I'm like, no, the only thing I have to wear is, I didn't plan. But Lori was just absolutely wonderful. And Lori saved my life a number of times previously when I was going through some emotional stuff after my divorce. And, I'd mentioned the PTSD attacks. Mandy looked after my townhouse and my stuff while I was in treatment. And then I get back to Harrisburg and I meet Mandy's boyfriend, Alan, for the very first time. And dude, I believe Alan is the one who cleaned up all the blood. Talk about doing above and beyond for somebody you don't know. And Alan physically helped move a lot of stuff. I had a lot of files from when I was a lawyer. He arranged for them to be disposed of. Mandy and Alan, I'm embarrassed at how I'll never be able to repay them. Lori, who has been such a rock to me and others, embarrassed that I will never be able to, accept to live. And then, just while I'm doing this, the owner of the cigar shop, and there's a group of 4 or 5 guys who helped pack up my townhouse. And I'm jumping ahead a couple of months now, but around Labor Day, at this point was living in a recovery house, and I had to go close down my townhouse. I guess it was the end of August, and people just stepped up. All those people that I didn't think could ask for help were so gracious at helping me. Yeah. And I got really humbled because I go back to Harrisburg and I see some people and I have to make amends. I have to do the steps. Mm-hmm. And the people that I send emails to. And I mean, hey, dude, I know we haven't really talked about this, but in the event my remains are unclaimed, would you arrange to have me cremated? And,
wow.
Et cetera, et cetera. So my first 2 days back in Harrisburg, I apologized to people. But the apology was, obviously, I was going through some stuff, and I'm sorry it affected you. And then there's a friend of mine from the cigar shop. She's a therapist. And she says, she hears the apologies. You don't have to apologize. But I was so angry at you because I didn't know this was coming. And I looked back, and I'm a therapist, and I was so angry that I didn't see this coming. And I was like, I didn't want you to see it coming. That was the conversation that made me realize I had inflicted pain on people I love, people that love me. Mm-hmm. So, all right, so get out of the psych ward. Lori, who I had mentioned, finds Cedar Creek, which is an STR, a Steps to Recovery mental health-based facility.
Is that where you met Sabrina?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and Sabrina was a care manager there. Mm-hmm. And it's the first, to my knowledge, in Pennsylvania, the first mental health-focused facility. So there are a lot of rehabs for drug and alcohol, but this was purely mental health. And by the way, new facility, I was patient number 5 ever.
Really?
Yeah, there were 4 people there when I was there. I was the 5th patient. And it's been really cool to see in the last 8 months or so how the facility has evolved and changed. And, now I kind of walk in, and I've just done business consulting my whole life. And I'm not trying to be a jerk as a patient, but I'm like, some of the things doing now, you guys should be really proud of this facility, but it's going to be different in a year. It's like, screw you, we're really proud. There's one guy who used to work there. We're really proud and blah, 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 blah. And what do you mean it's going to be different? And sure enough, 8 months later, that's just business. You start a new business and you realize, what you would do differently. But so I was new there, loved it, coming out where I'm at, I decided that I was going to take advantage of the treatment, and I decided I was going to do something that I learned at Chit Chat in 1985. Being smart doesn't do you any good in that situation. Mm-hmm. Being articulate doesn't do you any good in that situation. Trust the process, trust the people, and soak up as much as you can.
Well, I think the one missing piece of what you just said is letting people know where you're at. My sponsor tells me that all the time. You can make meetings, you can do the big book, you can go through the steps, but if you're not getting honest, letting people know where you're at, then they can't help you.
And that's a good point. And I got very lucky that when I got into recovery, when I got into AA after treatment, mm-hmm. People said, always raise your hand at meetings and share.
Mm-hmm. What you do.
And there are some times that I share because I got something jamming me up and I need to share. Mm-hmm. And there are other times I share much less frequently where I think I might have something to say.
That may help somebody.
That may help somebody. Like the beginner meetings.
Yeah.
I like to say, look, I'm fragile. I'm, whatever. But here are the things that I have done that seem to be very helpful. Mm-hmm. take of it what you want,
Right.
you know? And one of the things, for example, we both go to a meeting called Octus, which is my home group, that is just my home.
It's a great place.
Absolutely love it. I
love
love the people. I feel so connected there.
I feel it's a safe place. I don't share at every meeting, but I'd like to share at that meeting. I feel safe there.
Which is funny because my perception of you is you share. It's because you share there, et cetera, et cetera. But boy, if that's not your cup of tea, you know, certainly in the Philadelphia area, but in most parts of the country, there are so many different meetings. Keep looking for one until you find your home.
Yeah, they're out there. That's for sure.
Et cetera. So after 31 days at Cedar Creek, I went for 4 months to a steps to recovery facility in Bucks County that was dual. They've got a mental health component and they've got a substance abuse component. And I was primarily mental health, but spent an hour a day with the substance abuse people. And that's when I started getting in touch with my recovery roots. And it was a little bit challenging at first because I very much owned the mental health. But, and dude, just this past week, someone was like, you relapsed. And I'm like, first of all, I don't need to convince you of my story.
Right. Well, I get, you know, AA is funny with the black and white and the gray areas, but I guess technically you did, but not in the sense that a person typically relapses.
This was an anesthesia.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to feel pain.
Yeah.
That said, started going to meetings. I live in a recovery house in Bensalem, and I'm very grateful, although it's a new experience. And dude, you know, I mentioned, and this isn't, you know, the trappings of life don't mean anything, but I went from 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom townhouse by myself to I'm living with 14 other guys in a recovery house, different levels of recovery, different life experiences entirely. And
Frankie. Okay, I'm sorry.
Frankie's your beautiful pup.
Yeah, she sucks sometimes. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, don't we all? But there was also, you know, certain things, and I shouldn't be embarrassed. You know, everything that I've just told you, here's the part that embarrasses me. I'm on food stamps. I'm on Medicaid, you know, because I don't have money for health insurance. You know, I'm living in the recovery house because it's the right place to be, and I still got stuff to work through that I don't think it would do well for me to be living on my own yet. I don't think it would be dangerous. I just don't think it would be the best thing for me.
But it's great that you know that. That's great that you know that. I feel like I don't want to say guys like us, but I've heard situations where, you know, you get a little bit of time together and you think you can go back to the way, maybe not life was previously, but a very similar situation. And then all of a sudden you're overwhelmed and bad things happen and you're back to square one. So it's great that you realize where you need to be and that you're there now.
I'm very lucky to be there. It is very, very good for me. You know, with everybody, there's 15 people there, so sometimes there can be knocking heads a little bit. The other thing that's very poignant is, you know, I was thinking since I've been there and since August, 13 guys have come and gone from the house. I think 2 have gone on to what they call sober houses, which is same concept as a recovery house, but you live in your own room and, you know, there's fewer people. 2 other guys have gotten their own apartments, and the remaining 8 or 9 have relapsed. So
if you relapse, do you immediately have to go? Is that how it's structured?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've had a guy that younger guy that I think the world of, who relapsed, went into treatment and then came back.
Yeah. Okay.
Et cetera, and is back at the house now. But oh my God, you had mentioned the woman who was the care manager at STR, and this was all new to me. She came up to me and pulled me out of a group therapy session and just said, "Do you want me to help you sign up for food stamps?" And I was like, holy shit, and that's how stupid it is. Holy shit, I knew I was broke. I didn't know I was that broke. So there are things that dude, I remember one time I've been to a food pantry through this journey, and I was mindful that every other time I've been to a food pantry in the past, it was with my synagogue to, you know, package foods, to take my kids off.
Frankie, stop doing that.
So there's all kinds of stuff that's humbling. And then, you know, one of the things that I'll say is I got into both the psych ward and the first week or so at STR Cedar Creek, and I was ambivalent that I was alive. I accepted that I was alive. I had it in my mind that, like I said, I was ready to go. The universe said not yet, but I had no clue. And it's funny because a lot of the work of the podcast was just advocacy for employee ownership, which I'm passionate about, which I think many would agree is a good cause that I did good at. But people were like, think how many people you can help with your story. And I got angry, dude, for like weeks. I was like,
Why?
I don't have the obligation to stay alive to help other people.
Okay.
And I had an attitude because there was a little bit that ties into other bag. Man, I have helped people and this is where it got me, et cetera, et cetera. Don't tell me I'm alive to help other people. Why am I alive? And there was this guy that, younger guy, early 30s, and we're in a group session, and he said, you keep saying you don't have an obligation to help other people. What if you had the privilege?
I like that.
And I was like, yeah, that's kind of my language.
I like that.
And I kind of thought about it a little bit. So I got to tell you, dude, I am uncomfortable with this conversation. I am uncomfortable. I hosted almost 700 episodes of my own podcast, the ESOP Podcast, still available at esoppodcast.com. Sorry, that's old habits die hard, friend.
I always love when people do that on Joe Rogan. And probably on that episode, like their business and their sales just go through the roof. So
That's right.
We'll see what happens.
That's right. Yeah, the free podcast where nothing's for sale. We'll go through. But I still do a little bit of consulting to be able to pay the rent and that sort of thing. But I also have to figure out, on the one hand, perhaps there is some aspect of the life that I had in employee ownership that would still be open to me. Big part of me is like, I would really like to, on some level, get into the mental health or the recovery field, because the other thing is there often seems to be a line drawn between mental health and recovery. Now, back when I originally, in '85, got into recovery, if you talked about mental health, literally the response was, shut up, just don't drink.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
Meanwhile, there is an understanding that when I talk about stuff from a mental health perspective at the meetings, and I couch things often in the recovery, and there is no doubt I'm coming to terms with the addictive nature of my personality. But I also noticed that and this group we had mentioned, Octus, is very open about, it's Alcoholics Anonymous, but if what you're going through that day is depression, talk about depression.
Well, I think it's 2025, and not that getting sober has changed, but recovery has changed. Like, you're sober or you're not. That's it.
Right.
But the recovery process, I think people are understanding that it has changed, and the mental health, as you described, is such a huge component for me, for you, for most of us, that it's more than just don't drink, make meetings.
Right. It's
for a
the
lot
brain
of people.
wiring. It's all of the stuff that is going on. And then there's certain things that had helped along. And like I said, there was a little bit of a struggle between me and others. I'm in the psych ward. I'm talking to friends who are in recovery, and I've mentioned Lori. And again, in the suicide emails, which is, I know it's a modern thing, but it still sounds weird. It was, I don't want you to think this is a relapse. Alcohol was involved, but it's an anesthesia. And I remember saying, I just had 34 years a week ago. And Lori, who I'll match her recovery against anybody, was like, dude, that's up to you. Like you want to reset the clock. You don't, then your recovery date is still 1990, Memorial Day 1990. And got to tell you, there was a little bit of, I took so much blowback from strangers. So you're lying, there was a relapse. I'm like, all right, so I'll reset my date. No, I'm at like 8 months. It's not like the 34 years went away. And what to me isn't that important, boy, my recovery dates seem to be important to complete strangers, et cetera.
Well,
So
you do see, and I don't care who you are, you do see people with more time than you or more time than me, and not all, but there is like an air of superiority. And I catch that, and I immediately get asked up in my head. I'm thinking like, you have no fucking idea what my life is like. You may be sober longer than me, but But that's the wrong attitude to take.
But you have more podcast episodes.
But it's hard not to be a little frustrated with someone telling you what your sobriety is.
Right.
Like it's hard to deal with.
Well, and I'll just give you an example. And we talked about, one of the other things besides don't mention mental health, don't drink, make meetings, has evolved. But some of the meetings I go to are Cocaine Anonymous. And got to tell you, I'm an AA guy.
Yeah, same.
God bless the folks at CA, but the meetings aren't quite my cup of tea. At CA, they say, keep things limited to cocaine. So when I introduce myself at CA, it's not, hi, I'm Bret, I'm an alcoholic. It's, hi, I'm Bret, I'm an addict. And I'm okay with that. But I haven't done cocaine literally since 1990. So why don't I have 34 years in CA, and okay, I had Jack Daniels, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, that's noise, not directly related to the journey. We talk about often in the program not getting caught up in resentments that don't matter. And that's a good lesson for me to learn. Here's also was when things began to turn for me. And I accepted that I would go, when I brought up the recovery house, what I'd started to say is, your first 30 days in a recovery house, you are on blackout. You don't get to go anywhere except meetings. You can do job searches, et cetera, et cetera. And you are required to hit 30 meetings in 30 days.
Okay.
And once you're done with the 30 meetings in 30 days, you are required to do 4 meetings a week. Well, people in recovery will often suggest to people new to recovery do 90 meetings in 90 days. And lots of good reasons for it. One is to get you in the habit of going to meetings. The other thing, going back to 1985, is the meetings I would hit would be midnight meetings because that's when I had drunk. So keep you off the streets, when you would normally go out partying and all that kind of thing. I decided early on, like when I'm still in the 30-day period, I'm going to do 90 and 90. And a little bit of, what else do I have to do? And I sold one of my cars, et cetera, et cetera. The other car is disabled and I still need to get it resolved. So I don't have my own transportation. I rely on the kindness of people in the program or people at the house to get me to meetings and whatnot. But I decided I was going to do 90 and 90. And then probably about 6 weeks in, I was like, screw it. I'm going to go to meetings every day unless I have a reason not to go to a meeting. And till I feel that that's not where I'm at this moment.
That was my thought process coming out of rehab. I'm going to go every day, and if something happens and I can't go, and it's a valid reason, then I can't go.
Yeah.
But my plan is to go every day.
Yeah.
And that, just to keep it simple.
And I hit it. And there's also one other thing that kind of works out really cool is new people who are in blackout need a senior member of the house, which is anybody over 30 days, to go with them to meetings. And I let the new people know as they come into the house that I will be your senior member for anything. You need to go to Wawa to get some food, et cetera, et cetera. I will ride along with you so you can go. You must, as a new member, hit 30 meetings in 30 days. I will ride along with you. So some of it is doing what we call the 12-step work of helping others who get there. But one of the things, Anthony, that made a huge difference in my thinking of it, because I really was struggling, and I don't look at it, and I alluded to it, and you just said it. I don't feel that for me, having that bottle of Jack sit on my counter for a week, it just doesn't feel like it was a relapse. It was a suicide attempt. So I come in, and the first step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. And I was like, dude, I knew I was powerless over alcohol in 1990, 1985. And everybody's addiction goes a little bit differently. For me, my alcoholism was in the men. I don't think I've ever drank in the morning in my life. If I drank at lunchtime, there was probably an event or something, and there was reason for it. My form of alcoholism, which is not unique, but no matter what time of day I started, I could not stop until I was intoxicated, until I was done. So I might not start till 4, I might not start till 9 p.m., but I would drink till I passed out. Wouldn't necessarily drink every day, but that was my form of alcoholism. So I accepted that I was powerless over alcohol 35 years ago, without question. And then somebody in a meeting pointed out that there's a hyphen there. I was powerless over alcohol, hyphen.
Yeah.
And our lives had become unmanageable. And I'm like, holy shit, what bigger sign of unmanageability is there than I tried to end my life.
Yeah.
That I tried to walk away. And so once I was like, oh, I got the first step, without hesitation, that helped bring everything into the here and now. That this wasn't just a nostalgic look at my recovery path, but there are things that I can go on. So I hit the meetings every day, have a wonderful sponsor, Jim W., who said to me, the day I asked him to be the sponsor, he said, call me every day at 3 p.m. Let me know how you're doing. I've often joked that maybe he actually just said, call me the next day at 3 p.m., but I've called him every day. And what's cool about him is, first of all, he is steeped in recovery. He is steeped in the program.
He's a great guy, for sure.
And I may bring up an issue to him, and he's just got a recovery-based answer or suggestion to everything. I like the phone calls. Some sponsors have their people text. To me, it would be too easy for me to BS. And if it weren't for the schedule, and I kind of get this from my mom, if he just said, call me every day, I'd be like, well, he's probably busy right now. Well, it's
I like the
not a
fact
good
that he gave you time.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
And it's actually become a running joke. And there's a guy in the program, I won't mention him, but we were talking about him earlier, but he actually just yesterday walked up and he said, did you call Jimmy at 3 o'clock today? And I'm like, it was 3:06. And by the way, it's not your business.
All right.
But what I like is that there have been times where I've had stuff going on that I've had to process, and Jim will give me 25, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Last couple of days, things are good. We've had 2-minute check-ins.
Right. That's how it was with my guy, too.
Yeah. So it's just, it is absolutely wonderful. But as I'm working through the steps, I'm grateful that this is where I'm at. I'm grateful that in the context of working on recovery that I'm able to focus on the mental health things. Because for me, one of the great unanswered questions, and maybe I'll come up with the answer, maybe I'm just not destined to have that answer, is not, why did I decide to end my life? That I understand. I understand that it wasn't a good decision, but it's like, you're going to be broke, you're going to end your life. But for 6 months, I just accepted that was the right decision. That's the scary thing. But I got to tell you, in terms of, as we always go through, well, it could always be worse. I was roommates with a guy in treatment, wonderful guy. And one thing this conversation is doing is reminding me, there's some people I got to reach out to that I haven't talked to in a couple of months. But he just, spur of the moment, was walking down the street and decided to jump in front of a car.
Really?
And to me, that's even more terrifying than what I did, because I could have hey, I think I may end my life at some point in the future. And now I know there are various steps. Now I know that there are things I could do. I would raise my hand, et cetera. But if there were just a spontaneous boom, how do you prevent that? So I work the program. I try to be positive. I don't want to say influence, but I try to be positive. I try to do what I should be doing. And the recovery, as I've pointed out, I haven't had an urge to drink in 35 years. So the focus really is, and I feel very badly for people in the program who are like, wow, I really wanted to use today. My heart breaks. It's just not my experience.
Right.
But mine is, oh my God, I have so much anxiety. And if this were the anxiety and depression podcast, I'd go into it at length. But every single day I've had anxiety for as long as I can remember. And it's actually gotten better by working the steps of AA. That's the funny thing, is that, it helps the mental health generally, and it's all the same brain wiring. But the anxiety and the depression are the things that are keeping me on my toes. And that's what I'm looking for. And ultimately, Anthony, doing stuff like this, and you're giving me the opportunity. First of all, I'm meeting the coolest people now in the recovery context.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
But to be able, and I thought back when dude said, don't think of it as an obligation to tell your story. Think of it as a privilege. And now I've got the privilege of sitting here chatting with you with the hopes that, and if I didn't say it clearly, I wish I hadn't made the decision to try and end my life. I wish I had used that 6 months to find a solution. I wish that my anxiety and depression hadn't been such that, again, ending my life made sense. But there is always something that you can do to put yourself in a better place.
Bret, I mean, you went through a lot. Like your story, and my wife is gonna love listening to this one because she always says I talk too fucking much. So, but I do have some questions, right?
Sure.
I do some questions. You said multiple times that you knew when you were broke that you were gonna plan to end your life,
Right.
And I know you went to law school, you're a lawyer, you had the podcast, you did business consulting, and you sold your business, and it sounds like you had a very successful career that many people would like to have. What happened at that time where you couldn't earn more money, or did you decide not to earn more money? Like, why did you give up on earning money and just resign yourself to the fact that when the money's gone, so am I?
Well, to some extent, that is the question. And there were periods, like if you look at March and April of 2024, where I and the woman behind the scenes of the podcast, who, by the way, made me promise 7 years ago not to use her name, I so want to say to her, she will never know how much gratitude there is. But there was a little bit of, hey, if you want consulting, if you want whatever, certain things came my way. Occasionally a company would reach out and ask me to be a keynote speaker. Mm-hmm. At this particular moment as we're recording this, I don't have it in me to do a lot of traveling, but there used to be a lot of traveling. I was on the road 3 weeks out of every month for a number of years. But I think truly it was just the depression and the anxiety. There are things I could do to make money. There are, and still are. Mm-hmm. Now I'm making enough to cover rent and working enough so that the house rules are honored, mm-hmm. Et cetera, et cetera. But still a little bit jammed up in terms of what do I want to do with the next phase of my career. But your question isn't quite this dramatic, but it's akin to saying someone in recovery, why didn't you just stop drinking? Dude, if I could have.
Right. That's a good point. You also mentioned you were doing a podcast. I forget exactly what you said. You were driving to and from an engagement, and you were suffering from a PTSD moment that whole time. Do you mind telling me what the PTSD moment stemmed from?
The divorce that I went through was very devastating to me. Mm-hmm. Ironically, the divorce itself was relatively amicable, but got very acrimonious afterwards. Mm-hmm. But as a concurrent with that, at the same time, my mother was dying of dementia. She was in a nursing home from 2016 to when she passed in 2020. And I come from a large family, 7 children. I'm the 5th of 7 children. And my mother decided 10 years before she got dementia that she named me her sole power of attorney.
Okay.
So some family members were not pleased that the little brother was the power of attorney. Mm-hmm. Some family members were adamant that every decision had to be brought to the family to discuss.
Right, the board of directors.
Whereas I was adamant that my mom did not name all 7 children to be power of attorneys. My mom did not name 2 or 3 people to consult. Mm-hmm. That there were some decisions that were
yours to make.
Mine to make. And by the way, one of the things, that, and I had a little bit of experience while practicing law, of how to do this. So the doctors would call and we want to take your mom off this medication. Explain to me so I understand it. And the doctors would go through and here's their thinking, blah, 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 blah. And maybe I'd have questions. Maybe it was that clear. But there was not a single time where I counteracted the medical advice. But a couple of siblings were very ugly about it.
So you would discuss what was going on with your siblings prior to making a decision to some degree?
No, some of them were, hey, we want to take her off this med. And I'd be like, okay, we'll have this.
Okay.
My older sister oldest sister, I should say, who spent daily time with my mother and really was a blessing to my mother, to me, and to the whole family. She became kind of the communicator, et cetera, et cetera. But there were one sibling in particular who was particularly ugly towards me. And philosophically, I can forgive him, but he won't be welcome back in my life ever. And the other siblings I felt didn't protect me. So there was the pressure of one or two siblings were suggesting that I wasn't treating my mother well, coming off the divorce, coming off of all kinds of baggage, and it manifested itself. And by the way, I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2016, 2017, and I resisted it. I was never in the armed forces. I wasn't a first responder. I didn't deserve, I didn't earn PTSD. And the therapist was like, well, a lot of people don't have your family,
right,
et cetera. But even going back, and I kind of want to, and you and I talked about this a little bit, I don't want to talk a whole lot about the family because although they're integral to my story, there's also two sides to every story, or, with 7 kids, there are 9 sides to every story. And I acknowledge that there are some who will have completely different version, and you can get them on your pod. No, so I don't want to go too far. But I will tell you that in 2016, this is post-separation, and I've been in couples therapy for a little bit, and then I stayed individually. 2015, I guess maybe it was, I'm formally diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And I was like, well, that can't be right. This is how I felt my whole life. Duh, Bret. You've had depression and anxiety your whole life. So now here's an interesting thing just from a recovery thing. The first 2 PTSD episodes, including the one that I'd referenced where I drove and recorded a podcast, and you can't tell. And that still blows my mind. Dude, I was white knuckle crying on the Pennsylvania Turnpike back to Harrisburg after recording this. And you can't frickin' tell. Like I don't know if that's some kind of, what a performer or what have you. But with the depression and the anxiety, with the PTSD episodes, the first 2, everybody, myself, my therapist, family members who were aware of it, my good friends who were aware of it, we all thought they were relapse potentials. Oh my God, Bret's going to drink. I thought that.
Really?
I thought that. Well, there was the one that I referenced to. I drove around Harrisburg for 3.5 hours. I had a business check with me that I was ready to drive to Atlantic City because I spent a year doing very amateur stand-up, open mic stand-up, and became friends with some professional comedians down there. Whole different podcast.
Yeah, that's episode 2.
I've done some stuff. So I became friends with some professional comedians out of Atlantic City, and I was going to take a check for $20,000 down to Atlantic City, and not ask my comedian friends, but ask a bellhop or ask where can I get $20,000 worth of cocaine. Wow. And I remember driving through Harrisburg for 4 hours, sweat soaking my skin, white knuckle on the steering wheel. And then at some point the fever broke and I said, I'm not going to do this. But it was like, am I really going to drive to Atlantic City? And my therapist, who I spent 5 or 6 years with, the therapist, when I told her about this, she said, were you planning on killing yourself? And I was like, I wasn't planning on killing myself, but I was planning on buying $20,000 worth of cocaine. I mean, there's a little bit to do the math.
Right.
So, and by the way, my friend Lori, who I've mentioned several times, was called in either by me or family members. She really is a saint on earth to interact with me. Lori, everybody should have a friend like Lori. Lori came knocking on my door one day, and this is in the midst of one of the PTSD things. And she said, I didn't know if you were going to answer the phone or answer the door. And I was like, Lori, I knew not answering the door with you would be futile. And she's like, I'm ever worried about you, I'll come through the window. And I have no doubt that she would have done that. So now we go to the following summer. It's the summer of 2019. And the sibling that I've mentioned that will never be welcome back in my life intentionally triggered me in a restaurant. It was Father's Day. So we've got a pretty good group in Father's Day. And pick whatever is the most intensely embarrassing thing in your life. Doesn't matter what it is. And my brother starts yelling about my most intensely embarrassing fact in a restaurant where people are turning their heads to
it's
look.
horrible.
He does it twice. I get up, I pull a lot of cash out of my wallet, throw it down. I'm getting the fuck out of here. Now my siblings, and again, this is my version. They got their own version. But their response, including from siblings that I really wanted some protection from, was, we will never make you sit next to him at a family meal again. And I'm like, I'm kind of going for the I shouldn't be at the family meal, you know, et cetera,
A little
et cetera.
different mindset.
Set me off on a 1 week long PTSD attack. I'm sorry, that was, and that was one. And my kids had reached out to Lori, and Lori calls me, and I'm heading down to, just driving towards Baltimore. I'm not even driving to Baltimore. I'm just heading down from Harrisburg in that direction. And Lori and I are talking, and I'm like, Lori, I don't think this is relapse. Like, I think it's the mental health, you know, and Lori and I were talking through it. And I was like, I think like, no, now in clarity, I don't want to get drunk, but I'm tired of all this pain.
Right.
So about a month and a half later, something came up, and it was the start of a PTSD attack that at this point I was recognizing was purely mental health and not relapse. And I wrote a very lengthy email to my father, who lived with me at the time, and my children, and basically said, I got to check out. And I went to Denver, Colorado, had a couple of clients out there, but mostly just loved it out there, and was planning to go out there for a few weeks, and spur of the moment, went in and rented an office for a year, and ducked out and was in Denver. And then, you know, of course, at the beginning of 2020, everything shut down for COVID. And I decided that as much as I love, dude, if you're in a traffic jam in Denver, you're still staring at the Rockies. You know what I mean? Like
Could be worse.
Oh my God. Like the traffic jams are amazing. And loved it out there, and was building, you know, a new network of employee ownership people. But COVID came, and I was like, if I get sick, the people who would support me would be back in Harrisburg. But so the PTSD stuff was, it was mental health stuff.
Right. So let me ask you this. I know you struggle with whether it's a relapse, whether it's not a relapse.
I don't struggle with it.
Well, okay. let me change that question.
Sorry.
So that the day you drank, right?
Yeah.
You don't equate that to the traditional relapse that most people would say in AA, that you drank, it's a relapse, end of story.
I don't. I accept that other people do.
Right. So, but now you're back in the recovery scene. You're making meetings, right? You're involved in AA. I've seen it myself. Do you struggle with that balance, knowing that you're in recovery meetings when really your issue may just be mental health and not necessarily drinking? Or have you kind of combined the two and now seek AA recovery as the answer to your mental health?
I think the AA recovery, that's a great question. I think the AA recovery is critical to my mental health. I think that, for example, there was something that had come up in December that I had to deal with. And I won't get into what it is, but I had to deal with it. And it was something that I should have dealt with a long time ago. reaching out to a couple people that were as important to me. And I had such anxiety about this life-changing stuff, or I had such anxiety about this big thing that I was going to do, and spoke at a meeting. I'm just feeling anxiety. No desire to drink, but I'm feeling anxiety. And there were a couple of people at the meeting, and I won't for anonymity shout them out, but there's a guy with a lot of recovery that is just so amazing.
Yep.
And my sponsor recommended the fear prayer, step 4 fear prayer. God, remove this fear from me so I can do what your will for me is.
Yeah,
And
which you recommended to me to do. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
and that was a
Yep.
business thing. You had a business thing. And I said, do this, dude. 3 or 4 times I do that prayer, and the next morning the anxiety's gone. And coming up to the day I was going to reach out to some people, I did that prayer a lot, and I had no anxiety. I wasn't necessarily looking forward to reaching out because it had been quite a while, but there was no anxiety. And then afterwards, the reaching out didn't go as I would have hoped, but I don't get to pick, how things go. And I Googled that night, depression and AA, and it referred me to the Prayer of St. Francis, which appears, and by the way, I am not a AA book thumper, but it appears on 99 of the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book, and this is a prayer to St. Francis to basically take everything that's wrong with me and let me do things better in your will. And the depression went away. So for me, it is a distinction without a difference, as they say. This isn't there are plenty of people in AA who have not felt an urge to use in quite a long time.
Right.
The steps that I am doing, and for those following along, I'm currently officially on the 4th step with my sponsor. The steps might have originally been, this is how we're going to address alcoholism. But, oh my God, it really is a guide for living.
Well, and you're right. And you hear people share that all the time. Everybody could use the program that we're in to benefit their lives, regardless of if you're an alcoholic or an addict.
Yeah.
So I get that. I believe that. So now we're in today.
Yep.
Right? So I know for me, I have a set of things I do every morning to just get me off to the right start.
Yep.
Obviously, the meetings are a part of it. Call my sponsor daily is a part of it. For me, the gym is a part of it. So before we talk about that, what just happened with you, do you have a system or a daily discipline that you do just to kind of keep you and your head at bay and with your thoughts and your anxiety? What's your normal day look like today?
I try to read every day from the big book or one of the AA book literatures. I will tell you, and this harkens back to my professional career, we have, as you know, Octus Monday nights has step meetings where we read from the 12 Steps, 12 Tradition books, and we will, among everybody at the meeting, take turns reading from the step of that week. And then Wednesdays is a big book meeting where we'll read whatever section of the big book we are at. And I do tend on Monday and Wednesday to read them twice ahead of time, because this is just for me, but if I go in and I'm hearing it for the first time, I'm actually analyzing what it says, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Whereas if I go through it a couple of times,
You
I
comprehend
can
it, you understand it, you can share more.
this is how it affects to me,
right,
and et cetera. So I do that. 3 weeks ago, as we're recording this, there's a guy moved in the house who had been an Octus guy that I recognized, didn't know him well, and it's just been such a wonderful addition.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
For me. But he said, he sent me the Insight meditation app.
Okay.
And he said, you should try meditation. And I tried it. It was great. I had never meditated in my life until I was in treatment this summer. But it was a guided meditation by a woman named Tamara, who just, oh my God, was just, I can't say enough about the people who worked at Cedar Creek, STR Cedar Creek. And we have a mutual friend, Joe B., who was a tech there and was able to reconnect with him in the meetings afterwards. But Tamara was the holistic coach. So she did guided meditation. She did some of what I used to call the woo-woo stuff, et cetera. But absolutely, it was wonderful. And she did these guided meditations that, when she said, "Imagine you're on an island," dude, I was off, and
you could do
it was
it.
amazing. I could do it. And then I left treatment, and it didn't come up. So Sean sends me this meditation app, and I did it a couple of times, and I liked it. And I made the mistake, I tell you, of mentioning to my sponsor that I had meditated. So it was like on a Friday. I was like, "Hey, I meditated the last couple of days." So Monday I do a 3 o'clock call in, and that Monday, the day just went a little bit wonky. I had helped some new guys get some meetings, and I didn't have, quote unquote, control of my schedule. So I call him at 3 o'clock to check in, and the first words out of his mouth is, "Did you meditate today?" And I was like, I didn't know this was a sponsor thing. And I'm just opening up my phone. Now that it's a sponsor thing, I actually have the widget on it. I have meditated for 19 straight days.
Oh,
Today will be
beautiful.
the 20th. And that's the kind of thing that when we talked about getting to meetings but not going nuts, like normally that's a late morning, early afternoon. For me, I'm a little too sleepy first thing in the morning.
To get the benefits of it, right?
Yeah, and same thing with the reading. I like to be awake for a little bit so I can actually process and think about stuff. So it didn't happen today because you were picking me up mid-morning to be able to record this. But I was also like, I'll get to it later. But I set up a reminder on the phone. So I do the meditation. I take, in whatever form it is, 15 people out of people. And it's funny because it just popped into my head now and I hadn't really thought about it at all. And I'm going to have to give this some thought. I haven't been in this active of a house since I was a kid with my family. And I wonder if that's some of the, reactions I have. But, I mentioned the anxiety. You suddenly get 8 guys showing up at once for dinner or after dinner and talking loud and being boisterous, which... more power to them.
Right.
But I'm like, oh my God, there's like
a lot of action going on.
A lot of action going on. So I have taken to, if people are generally, let's say, hitting bed around 11, whether it's a little bit of TV or a little bit of downtime, I'll take an hour at the end of the day because if I were around all this boisterous activity and then went right to bed, that would be what my brain is in. And then I try to listen to something calming as I fall asleep. But a good part of my day, and people at the house have now come understand it even to this point, is anxiety management. Like if I find something that is going on that is causing me anxiety, I tend to sit off in a corner. The other thing, I've shared about this at meetings, I learned a word a couple years ago called ambivert. Which is
you mentioned that the other day, and I that's me.
Yeah, it's a combination of extrovert and introvert. And
How did you describe it the other day? Because the way you described it was, I thought to myself, my God, that's me.
I don't know. Well, in terms of how it fit in with me, I can speak in front of hundreds of people, and I've been privileged enough to be asked to speak in front of hundreds of people. Did my podcast? I can be on. I can talk. I can do this. But when it's over, I got to go sit in the corner.
Yeah.
I need to be off by myself to reground myself and kind of recharge a little bit. And give you an example. Octus, the group we've talked about, had their anniversary, 45th anniversary in early January, and it was just such a cool event. 130 people came.
Let me let her out.
130 people come to this anniversary dinner, and I got there to help set up early, and one of our friends, Pierre, just said, "Bret, you're selling raffle tickets." And for 2 hours, the stairway downstairs to where the dinner and the meeting was being held, people would come down, and Pierre is sitting at a chair right at the entrance to the dining room. And Pierre would say hello, welcome them. And I'm sitting like 4 feet away in another chair. And Pierre would say, "Hey, welcome to Octus. Good to see you. Glad you're here. Bret needs to have a word with you." And then I would put the hit on them to buy raffle tickets.
Yep.
And by the way, we sold more raffle tickets this year than any other year. And twice during the lead up to it, I got up and dude, I didn't, and this is still on the ambivert stuff. I didn't think twice about it. I made announcements. May I have your attention, please? I'm Bret. I'm an alcoholic, and Pierre says I'm going to have to work out with him at 4:30 in the frickin' morning if you don't buy more tickets, et cetera, et cetera. And then 5 minutes to 7, I'm like, hey, this is Bret. We decided if we sell $100 more tickets, I voluntarily will work at it. And I'm in front of the whole crowd.
Yeah.
And I am loud, and I am outgoing, and I'm in my element.
Yep.
What people didn't see is when it came time to get the food and have dinner, I ate by myself in a corner of the kitchen.
Really?
Because now I wouldn't have done that except since I made a spectacle of myself, not in a bad way, but I'd called attention to myself. I was afraid if I just plopped down at a table, people are going to think I'm that outgoing. Right. So there was, and it wasn't bad that I was in the kitchen. It was just like, and some of the people in the said, hey, dude, you okay? I'm like, perfect. Just get some quiet time, getting regrounded, you know,
right.
et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of, that's the mental health management that I still do.
Right. That's good stuff. So let me ask you one more question, and then we'll close out. All right.
Sure.
Because you've had a successful career, right? 34 years of sobriety, 35-ish, right? Well, I don't mean
8 months according to the clock now.
Right.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of people that come into the rooms in different situations. You know, if you want to say higher, lower, bottom, whatever. In my life, even though I was running my personal life into the ground, my professional life kept escalating and going well.
Sure.
I was really good at hiding it at work, and you know, I kept advancing in my career. But the pain got great enough, right? And you know, gift of desperation, as they say. And luckily, I was blessed with it, and I stopped and I dove into the program.
Right.
So my bottom could have been way lower.
Sure.
And now I'm at a point where, whether you want to consider it lucky or the gratitude or the appreciation behind the fact that my bottom was what it was, I don't want to say it's easier for me to stay sober, but I see some of the people that come in with extremely low bottoms, and they're really going to scrape and claw their way up just to have some level of a manageable life. I look at you similar to me, right? You a higher bottom guy. Now, I know you attempted suicide, and that is as bad as it can get.
But it is fair to say that my bottom was not nearly
right. Your
as low as a lot of
foundation
people.
with your career, your education, all the things you have done in your life. Do you think about that sometimes as it pertains to your sobriety, and think that you do still have a chance at 60 to really take control of your life, your career, and have an amazing bounce back? Whereas some people would, you know, they'd really kill to be in your situation in a recovery house.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? Like, I think you have the ability, once you're ready to go out on your own, to really start your career back over. You can do whatever it is that you want because you already have had the foundation, all the work that you put in over the past 30, 40 years to do that. Do you ever think about that?
Not quite as you've said it. First of all, I'm not sure that what I'm working towards is to get back to the career as I understood it. There was an awful lot of, you know, as an ESOP trustee, we would buy and sell companies, and it's not to go in there, but the average value of my transactions were $35 million.
Wow.
There was some stress in these, you know. Every so often, you know, a housemate or somebody will be giving me grief about something. And I remind myself, there's a guy who started his company who thinks it's worth $50 million. And I said to him, it's only worth 35. Oh my God. What people are going to say in this part of my life, I have been MF'd by some really well-known and famous people, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. Look, if anybody in the employee ownership field who knows my work going back to 2012 wanted to reach out and say, oh my God, Bret, we have X for you. I would absolutely, first of all, there'd be gratitude. I would consider it. I'd be happy to be thought of like that. But I'm not sure that I don't end up somehow in the mental health and recovery fields, and almost starting as a entry-level position, because I'm not concerned in the least at getting back what I had. Because one of the things, and to be broke when one has never been broke before, was extremely humbling.
I'm sure.
To be in a van going from when I was at STR Bucks, the second STR facility. I lived in one of their housing units for about 3 weeks, and every morning they would send a van to pick us all up. And every morning the van would stop at Wawa's. I couldn't afford Wawa's. Dude, I was probably started going to meetings at the end of July, and it was probably mid to late October before I had $1 to put in the basket at meetings.
Right.
And oh my God, the feelings of such pride when I could start putting that $1 just in. And dude, this was where the average breakfast for me in the 5 years running up, I would spend $13 on breakfast and tip 10. You know, and I'm not anxious to get that life back, but there are things, and AA is filled with slogans. And there's an older guy that we've alluded to, but didn't mention his name, that was kind enough to add me to his morning meditation list.
Right.
And he...
Give me 1 second, all right?
So there's a guy that we've talked to, and haven't mentioned my name, but he's like the elder statesman at Octus. And he was kind enough to put me on a morning meditation. Dude, there are 6 different people who send little meditations every morning. I feel really connected.
Yes, it's like every morning there's like 7 or 8 different text messages.
Yeah, and it's just really, really cool.
Yeah.
But one of the things he said, and this was when I was in the humbled phase, is if you have everything you need, you have everything. And sometimes we live by the slogans, and it feels like slogans, but I took that to heart. Dude, I have everything I need. I have a roof over my head. I've got food, sometimes with food stamps, sometimes it's the meals that we have gone through. I still have the ability to communicate, which was so important. I've got everything I need. I don't have everything I want, but I have everything I need, and I accept the fact if you have everything you need, you've got everything.
And it's funny you said that, because the guy that you're speaking of, it's almost
Let's
like
give Joe S. a shout out.
Joe, he has like no wrong answer.
No.
So, I don't want to get into this whole story, but about 2 years ago, I had 90 days on Christmas.
Very cool.
And, I relapsed shortly after, but my wife and I were going through a difficult time, all of my making. She's the best wife, and I was trying to end our marriage because I was a selfish alcoholic who didn't relapse for 90 days. That's all it was.
Right.
And he said to me, as calm as he is, exhaust every single option that you have before making this decision, because it's one that you may regret. And I wanted to drink, and I had no program. And just that alone right there, with the 6 to 9 months of relapse after that, I never let that go. It was me just wanting to drink and not get caught and not have to explain myself. And my wife was getting in the way, but that was the best advice he ever gave me. And I learned how to pray from him. He's just an amazing guy.
He is. That's one thing that kind of the stuff that I struggle with AA, because they say, pray for God's will, not your will. And I'm like, but how do I know I'm not asking God to justify what I want to do anyway?
Exactly.
Et cetera, et cetera. And early on, I wasn't sure how to pray, because I would pray. I'm Jewish, so I would certainly read all of these prayers. But the AA praying is different. The AA is a personal, very personalized to me.
Yeah, it's your own dialogue with your higher power, and it's between you and him, or you and that entity, and that's the way it is. There are certain prayers that you can pray word for word, and there's also words that you can just speak from the heart to whoever it is you're praying to.
And Joe and a couple of others, but Joe, when I would share at meetings that, boy, I'm just trying to figure this out, he's like, just keep praying. Just keep praying. And now, I'd shared that, the fear prayer took away my anxiety, and the St. Francis prayer took away my depression with regards to this one situation. And now it's funny. There was a guy in the rooms that said to me at one point, you'd adapt. This is getting back to how everybody's bottom is different. You'd adapt pretty well to being homeless.
Is that a compliment?
Yeah, I'm like, thanks. But for me, the balance really is I'm not trying to achieve what I had, whatever that was. And by the way, it's fine. I appreciate your words about being a success, et cetera, et cetera. The success came later, and some of it was success, some of it was just luck, et cetera, et cetera. But even I can't wait to see what the next part of my story is.
Yeah, I
I'm
can't
not
either.
trying to write it.
I can't either. We've talked a lot about the anxiety that you feel, and I can relate to so many different levels. I was reading this book, I forget the title, but there was a Mark Twain quote in it. I've been through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened.
Oh my God! Yeah. Oh my God!
And that is me to it too.
Yeah, I love that.
That is me to it too. I have this uncanny ability to project the worst possible outcome to a situation that hasn't even happened yet, and then when you get to the situation, it's like you couldn't have drew it up. You couldn't have drew it up.
Dude, that's the frustrating thing for me. And people are like, "Oh, Bret, you're gonna think about stuff, and this, that, and the other thing." And I'm like, all of the anxiety that I've suffered from my own whole life never comes to pass.
No.
I'll tell you something else.
It's all bullshit.
I'm working, as I've told you, I'm working on the 4th step. So one of the things is you got to list everything you're afraid of.
Yeah.
I had to add one to the list. There's a list. I was given a worksheet, and it's like, you can pick a lot of this. I had to add one that's not on there. This is going to sound really stupid. I'm a little embarrassed telling you. Out of everything I've said, this is probably what I'm embarrassed about. I'm afraid of mail.
Really?
I'm afraid of the mail coming because nobody ever writes you with good news.
Is that what your brother said at the dinner?
You're afraid of the postal service.
God damn you.
That was my secret. No, that was no, that wasn't it. But how do you even process? And by the way, the mail, maybe once every 6 months there's something troubling in the mail. But every day it's like, I'm really afraid. I'm afraid to get the mail. I'm afraid to look in the mailbox. It's just coupons,
right?
But that's the irrational stuff that to me is a little bit more daunting, because at least in the recovery context, just don't drink, and don't drink tomorrow. And with the mental health stuff, it's you can tell yourself all day long, don't feel anxiety, but it doesn't necessarily help. Here's one other point that I would like to make, and a lesson that I've learned that to me is a cool lesson. It kind of goes back to where I said a lot of my recovery journey, excuse me, a lot of my recovery journey is recognizing that hyphen, that my life is unmanageable, regardless of whether I've had, I've known that I was powerless over alcohol and substances, but my life had become unmanageable. Everybody, whether you're in the program or not, has pretty much heard the phrase one day at a time. And a lot of times, even in AA, don't drink today. And the context is, and it's actually a nice way to kind of wrap up the thrust of the question of what the daily practices are. But a lot of the context is, dude, don't drink today. And someone will say, I don't think I can go my whole life without drinking. Don't worry about it. Just don't drink today.
Right.
But what I've learned for me is that the one day at a time isn't just about not drinking. It's what are you doing? Are you meditating? Are you praying? Are you in touch with a higher power? Are you doing service to those who are in need? Where alcoholics are suffering, we make sure that we are there for them. There are plenty of people who also say, help those whether they're in recovery or not. That it's not just, just be helpful, be less of an asshole, et cetera. Try and be a better citizen. So these are the things when it's one day at a time. For me, it's so much more than just don't drink. It's how are you living your life? What are you doing? And ultimately, and I've tried to do the variation of this, not always succeeding, but for a good chunk of my adult life, which is Hawkeye Pierce from MASH, played by Alan Alda, at one point is in an argument with somebody, and they said, you can't fix the world. And he said, I'm not trying to fix the world. I'm just trying to take care of my little corner of it. And the daily practices that we do, if we can leave the world a little bit better place, if you can show grace to somebody that you wouldn't normally show grace to. One of the things that we talk about, the praying, that has made a huge difference for me. There are people I bump heads with. I'm strong-willed. There are other people who are strong-willed, and there are people we definitely we don't necessarily come from the same background, so there's not, whatever. And boy, if someone's making me crazy, my default now is to say, I'm praying for them.
Isn't that amazing?
Every so often, and it calms me the hell down.
Yeah.
Every so often, I kind of want to say, and it's almost kind of dickish, I'm praying for you, Anthony.
Yeah.
I don't want your prayers. Yeah, well, I'm praying for you anyway. But just to take a negative thought about somebody, even I mentioned, family that I'm estranged with, and there are a couple that aren't welcome back in my life, but I've added them to my prayer list. That's not hoping for any kind of reconciliation. That's not hoping for, somebody who triggered me intentionally and maliciously. I can't afford to let them be in my physical presence, but I can pray for them.
Right, and I think that goes hand in hand with just growth.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny. You mentioned was it Hawkeye? What is it?
Hawkeye Pierce. Yeah.
So sitcoms, right? You take that from that sitcom MASH.
Yeah.
My favorite sitcom to equate my sobriety to is Seinfeld.
Okay.
You a Seinfeld fan?
Late in life, never watched it when it was on,
Right.
but I think I watched all of it when there were repeats on Comedy
So
Central.
my dad, and it used to be on either 7 or 7:30 every day during the week,
Okay.
and I used to watch it with my dad in high school. And George Costanza in one episode stops getting laid. Right, that was his goal, to stop getting laid, and he all of a sudden started speaking like you, very articulate, very well spoken. All these goals, achieving all these things, and at the very end of the episode, him and Jerry are having dinner or lunch at the restaurant they go to, and he reverts right back to being a fucking dope. And Jerry's like, "What happened?" And he's like, "The Portuguese waitress." So my point to that all is, my Portuguese waitress is drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
You take the Portuguese waitress out of it, and you could do all these great things. Or to your point, have the ability to do whatever it is that you want when you're ready to do it.
Right.
And that's the beauty of sobriety for me, man. That's the beauty of it all.
I can't help but wonder, are you suggesting that I speak the way I speak because I'm not getting late? Because it kind of felt like...
that was George's alter ego when he finally
isn't that funny?
Yeah.
That show is brilliant.
Great show. Great show.
What I found really fascinating, because I didn't watch it at the time, but almost every episode had something that I was like, oh, that's what my friends have been talking about for 30 years.
It's a great show.
It's like, I'd heard it. Probably no better way than to leave on a George Costanza
I love it.
Quote.
Brett, this was amazing. I appreciate you telling your story. I thank you, and I'll be seeing you this week, and we'll go from there.
Dude, this is a important podcast that you're doing, and I've caught some of the other episodes, but even and I kind of broke your format a little bit, so thanks for giving me the flexibility. But if people can look at where they were the day before they got into treatment, and then look a little bit down the roads and where they're at, and in that sense, I honored your format. Just mine.
Like I said, my wife's gonna be very pleased with me.
But this is very important, and thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for bringing such a great presence in recovery for a lot of us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, dude.
That's it.
Hey, let me just remind people before we go one more time. Text or call 988 for the suicide hotline. It is important. There is help available, and but for the grace of God, we never would have met. So if people are thinking about harming themselves or their lives, it does get better. So I just wanted to throw out that number just once again.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett.
Dude, thank you.
I guess I want to end it this way.
Love you, bro.
Yeah.
We love you, Dad.
I love all of you.
We love you, daughter.
I love you too.